Okay, thank you. Then maybe Lolja, will you just go on, okay. And then you can put all your comments and questions.
Okay, so I will tell a little bit about organization in which I am a participant, and it is actually a movement. It is called Feminist Anti-War Resistance, and it began on the second day of the full-scale invasion in Ukraine on the 25th of February of 2022. And it started as different feminist activists from different regions, from different ongoing feminist groups, talking to each other and thinking how can we collaborate with each other in terms of the new horrible circumstances. And I think it's important to understand that the feminist movement itself in Russia was very quickly growing during the last many years. And I think during the last 10 years, it was evolving very intensely. And often when I go abroad, more people think that all of the political activity are happening precisely in Moscow and St. Petersburg, which is completely wrong, especially when we're talking about feminist community. And during the last 10 years, there were, I don't know, around 100 of different feminist groups all over Russia, different initiatives, different projects. And I think that the strength of the feminist movement in Russia is the ability of collaborating on a horizontal level and networking. So we had already a lot of examples when we were collaborating interregionally, internationally, when we needed to face different problems in terms of women's rights and queer people's rights. So we decided that we have to use this power to organize and make a feminist anti-war resistance movement. So it started as different groups uniting with each other inside Russia, but now it has grown to the international movement where we have activists who are still in Russia and working anonymously in a more partisan way of resisting. And we have those activists who had to move abroad because of the repressions and because of their life circumstances and sometimes threat to their freedom and to their health as well. I'm one of the persons who had to flee my hometown, St. Petersburg, a year ago, actually, in March last year, because I was one of the figurants of this anti-war big criminal cases that you were mentioning before. I was accused in so-called telephone terrorism, as many other activists, anti-war activists were as well. It was a fabricated criminal case, which was a complete made-up thing by secret police services, which they created just to put pressure on several most visible, I would say, activists in the anti-war protests. So before that, I already had a series of arrests during the last 2 years because of my activity in the field of women's rights and feminist activism. So my lawyers told me that I have to flee because it would be, like, I had a really high risk of going to prison for many years, so I had to flee. But it's important to understand that all the anti-war resistance movements, they exist only when you have people who had to flee the country and can continue do some type of work which can only be done from the outside of the country. And you still need people who are staying inside the country. And for feminist anti-war resistance, I would say that most of the active people, they have stayed inside the country because not everyone, I think only a small percentage of people have the ability, the privilege to be able to flee. I mean, it's a difficult kind of subject for discussion, like the balance between privileges and, you know, vulnerabilities, because when you are fleeing the country, you at the same time have as well as privileges, as well as vulnerabilities, and people who stay have certain vulnerabilities and privileges as well. So it's a difficult subject, but I stand very firmly on the idea that you won't have an effective anti-war resistance movement when in your group you have only people who had to flee, or you have only people who stayed. And I think that the political, I don't know, secret services as well and propaganda, they've been working really hard on trying to, break apart people who fled the country and people who stayed. I think, even though I understand that there are a lot of emotions, a lot of, grievances and conflicts between people who left and who stayed, still I can see how the propaganda and the, informational agents of the propaganda were forcing this conflict, because I think it is in the interest of the state to break apart these two groups of people so they won't be able to collaborate effectively. Even though, as we all know, that all the active initiatives in the anti-war movements are working constantly online, shoulder to shoulder, as I would say, with people who stayed and with people who left. So in feminist anti-war resistance, we have people of all genders, but I think predominantly women, and young women from age of 20 till 40, I would say. Also, we don't have any proper statistics, we don't have these possibilities, and at the same time, we have a lot of people who are joining the movement anonymously. We don't know their names, their age, their gender, so it's really hard to give some specific numbers here, but we definitely have a lot of people who stayed, and we have people who left, and I am, as a person who left the country, have this possibility to speak openly and to show my face and, to be here with you as I am right now, and most of the people from our movement, they don't have the access to such a visibility, because this is a high risk to their safety. So it's important for me to make you understand that I'm not a leader of a movement or some kind of one of the main persons. I'm just one of many people, most of whom cannot be here tonight and speak from themselves and be shown and be heard. It's important to say that we started as a movement back in 2022 in February and March as organizers of street protests. We have many of those in the beginning of the full-scale invasion, but very quickly we understood that this is a not effective way of resisting in the authoritarian state, in the state which is going quickly to the military dictatorship. Because as you seen from my colleagues, during the last year we had 20,000 of arrests, which is a huge number for even for such a large country. And it's important to understand that people who were taking part in the protests during the whole last year and still taking part in some protests, they are very brave people, because people are well aware which circumstances, which consequences they will face after they will participate in something like a street protest or a single picket or any anti-war activity. And people who were out on the streets during first couple of months, daily in different cities, they were well aware that they might face tortures, violence, police brutality, their families might get hurt or threatened, and they were still engaging in the protest, which I think is a very brave thing to do. And I think it's also important to understand that there are 140 million people living in Russia, and a lot of these people have really bad qualities of their life. They're very poor. Many have health issues, many have very low income, and when you are joining any protest activity, you should understand that it might affect, sometimes you don't have the so-called privilege, sorry for this inappropriate word for this, to join protest activity, because you can be afraid that what will happen to my children if I will get arrested for 1 month? Who will take care of my older relatives if I will get to jail and I'm the only person who, provides for the family? These are all all the, tiny things that we as feminist anti-war resistance as well put a spotlight on, because we think this is a feminist agenda, to see the diversity of the people who are living in Russia, to see the range of their vulnerabilities and different circumstances that they face. So we started from street protests, and then we decided that we need to switch to the more anonymous partisan way of resisting. By that time, a lot of our coordinators had to flee the country, and we started organizing from abroad. And those who stayed, they started, doing more partisan anonymous way of resisting. And we now have a variety of directions of our work. One of them, I think it's important to say that there's no main activity, they're all equal, but different groups of activists, different groups of coordinators are focusing on these different directions. For example, there is partisan agitation at the urban space. I think this is what started from the very beginning of the full-scale invasions. A lot of people were doing anti-war posters, spreading, paper anti-war agitation in the public spaces, like DIY, listovki, like papers with some important information, leaflets. They were doing anti-war graffiti. They were spreading stickers with QR codes leading to important information about what's going on. And this is a very important part of resistance towards the informational blockade, which was created by the Kremlin, because as you heard before, a lot of information was blocked, a lot of independent media was blocked, journalists was under, civilians and under repressions. So people on the grassroots level were trying to resist this blockade, and they were spreading information how they could in any available format, as well as the resisting at the urban space and spreading agitation at the offline, at the urban space. There was, and there still is, digital resistance, where people using social media to spread news articles from independent media, different socially important information of how to, not to get mobilized, how to help Ukrainian refugees who are stuck in Russia, who were brought to Russia from the occupied zones and by force, how to, join different anti-war groups and stay safe, how to resist in other formats than going out on the street and being arrested immediately. So this kind of, I won't say that this is an educational content, it's just spreading information, agitating and helping different groups of people to reach the important information that can help them to resist in a variety of ways. We, as Feminist Anti-War Resistance, we were really evolving our social media accounts. So we have Telegram, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook page, where we also write articles. We share information of different NGOs. We share stories of Ukrainian people and how they are surviving this war and fighting this war. We are sharing information about how can you safely donate to Ukrainian people, because it can be very not safe for Russian citizens, and you can become a figurant of a criminal case for supporting any Ukrainian organization. But there are still ways from, cryptocurrencies and different other ways to still donate money to Ukrainian people. Also, we were creating several groups of people who were helping different activists to evacuate from Russia, because Russian secret services are trying to clean up all the field. And right now, even a person who posts anything online about the war from the anti-war position, this person can't even, identify themselves as an activist, but this person still has a high risk of going to jail, and activists who went abroad are helping to organize sometimes very dangerous and complicating ways of bringing people out of the country. sometimes not even legal ways to bring people, to save people and bring them out of the country. So there's another part of work that we're doing, and it's important to know that this is a part of work where we are very strongly and daily collaborating with people who stayed. And also a lot of these people, they not presenting themselves and not identifying themselves as an activist, but they're helping people who identify themselves as an activist to flee the country, and they're also putting themselves under the danger. And I think it is a really great example of how solidarity works. And I mean, I think from the abroad, sometimes all these solidarity practices are not visible at all because of the safety issues, because it's not represented in the media as well, and sometimes because people just don't have time to share about it because they're busy with doing their work like on the ground. So other ways of resistance was already mentioned by my colleagues. For example, those who are called by the media violent ways of resistance, which I actually disagree when we're talking about, you know, breaking the railways and what anarchists do in Russia and Belarus as well, or throwing Molotov cocktails to the conscription offices. Media and the state, they find these ways of resistance violent, and even those political prisoners who are accused of such crimes can't get an international status of political prisoners and can't get enough support because their methods are seen as violent. And I think it's important to say that those people who are involved in this kind of resistance, they are very aware about the safety and how to make it that way not to hurt anybody. You know, I think breaking the railways couldn't be called a violent protest when nobody is hurt from humans, I don't know, animals. So nobody, as far as I know, was hurt from the burning the conscription offices, because mostly partisans did it during the night and during the weekends, precisely not to hurt anyone, but just to slow the work of these offices. And when they were breaking the railways, they also have protocols and safety, I don't know, leaflets and instructions how to do it not to hurt anybody, just to stop the war machines from going to the war zone. So I'm very in strict disagreement with also international NGOs who don't provide good enough support for those kind of protesters. So there's also very important issue. You were talking about the diversity of our table here, but I think we can honestly say that our table here is not that diverse, because we are obviously all white people and representatives from the, white Russians, I would say. And it's important to understand that in Russia, among these 140 million people, there are a diversity of ethnicities and nationalities. And I think it's a very great example of what is happening in terms of decolonial movements / anti-war movements in Russia right now, because we have so many people from different ethnic minorities, different nationalities, who during the last year formed and reinforced their democratical grassroots oppositional movements. And they're not only fighting against the colonial politics of Kremlin, but they're fighting against the colonial war in Ukraine as well. And they are focusing the attention on on this subject. They're saying that, look, Kremlin has been practicing this colonial politics towards its own, like, Russian citizens of different nationalities and different ethnical identities. And now Kremlin is practicing and kept actually practicing for years this colonial expansion, trying to attack different countries. Georgia, we have as an example before, now Ukraine. And it's very important for feminist anti-war resistance to use our platform to share it with decolonial movements of different national republics, indigenous people from Russia who are fighting for their independence, for their rights, and against the war and against the regime as well. So I think it's a very big part of feminist and agenda in general, and leftist agenda in general. So for us, it is very important. And I have to say that among our participants, there are not only people who identify themselves as Russian. We have people, not only different genders in feminist anti-war resistance, we have as well people from different ethnicities, different, sexual orientation, different beliefs. We have people of different political views. I can't say that all the people in anti-war movements and feminist anti-war resistance movements are leftists, for example. We have people who didn't decide yet which kind of political angle they are from, because a lot of activists in our movement are very young, and they, like, full invasion of Ukraine was an impulse for them to start their political activity. They didn't have even time to, dig into realizing, am I an anarchist, am I a leftist, am I a socialist, who am I a liberal? So I think for us, it's also important to be open for people who don't have yet such strong political statements in their mind in terms of identifying themselves. I think it's kind of inclusive to be that open. Of course, we will never collaborate with, alt-right people and conservative people, but still there are a lot of people who are new in this sphere of being politically aware and joining some protest activity. So we have to be welcome for them, and we have to, provide them knowledge and help them to look around and find themselves in this. I don't know, just let me know where my time is over, because it's really hard to cover everything that we have done, because from being only organizers of street protests, we have grown very much as an organization, as a movement during the last year. And one of our goals was, to grow these different directions, to form different groups of people, because in terms of inclusivity, in terms of diversity, in terms of feminist agenda, for us, it's really important to, help people to find themselves in the activist sphere, in the field of being active. Not everybody wants to be, a person who is, throwing Molotov cocktails. Not everybody wants to be a person who is, doing some kind of intense activist work. But there are a lot of people who want to be involved, but in a really tiny practices. For example, we have people who comes to our, social media and says, okay, I don't have activist background, but I can do texts, or I can be an interpreter, I can translate, or I can do some kind of graphic design, I can do videos, or I can, I have some money I want to donate to some organization. So, people want to use their skills to get involved, but sometimes they don't have an access and they don't have an understanding, how can I be involved, not becoming, a major activist and the enemy of the state. So we are trying to provide it, and we are trying to build these connections. And we are trying to make people, try different ways of being active, try different ways of being politically aware. And I think we made some success in this sphere, because right now we have a large pool of volunteers who are doing different kinds of tiny activist work and participating in different activist projects that we do. Another very important thing which can be seen, and which is a way of resisting the war while staying inside Russia and while not doing some kind of really radical work, is helping Ukrainian refugees, because as you might heard, there are, hundreds of thousands of people who were moved from the occupied territories to Russia by force. They didn't have any other choice where to go. They were brought by by the army, and they were settled in all over Russia, in all different regions. They didn't even have a right to choose where to go. They were just brought to some, tiny village or some city on the far east of Russia, and they made them settle there. And these people, they have trauma because they've been at the war zone. Some of them lost their close ones. They are under a lot of stress, and they have a terrible conditions of where they put to live. So we, as Feminist Anti-War Resistance and many other anti-war movements in Russia, they were building like an underground network of volunteers who were providing humanitarian help to these refugees. And as well, which is very important, they were secretly sharing with them information of how they can escape Russia. Secretly, because sometimes, you know, it can be dangerous to talk about these things because you never know what kind of people are working in these places with the refugees, and you can be identified as an anti-war person when you are sharing this information with the refugees. So we were creating ways of how to share, because we consider, and I think all of the NGOs, they agree that being a Ukrainian citizen in Russia, even if you are a refugee, is dangerous, because the Kremlin's policy is against Ukrainian people. Our president wants to destroy Ukrainian nation. He doesn't respect Ukrainian people as a nation. He doesn't respect Ukrainian culture. He wants to erase it from the world, and he says it with his own words. So I think in these circumstances, you can't even call Ukrainian people refugees in Russia because it's the country of the aggressor. So it's a really big importance to help these people leave. And hundreds, I think thousands of people are involved in these networks of helping Ukrainian families escape Russia, go through the border. Sometimes these people are going a long way through the whole country from the Far East, I don't know, to St. Petersburg, and then, only then they are crossing the border to Estonia or Lithuania, I don't know. So it is an important and very invisible way of resistance, because again, thousands of these people who are involved in this help, they are not identifying themselves as an activist. They are not visible. They are not sitting on conferences. They are not giving interviews, which is again dangerous for them. But they are there. They are living there. They are spending their money, their free time to do this kind of work. And what is it then? And anti-war resistance, because refugees and people who are the victims of war, they are the consequences of this war. And resisting the war is not only, you know, fighting police with your bare hands, but also working with this invisible and visible consequences of war. And I think this is a huge work which we will be doing. We all, I mean, people in Europe are doing this work as well, because so many people have to come from Ukraine and live here now. So this is the kind of work that we are going to do for years and years and years, even the war ends today. And I'm going to wrap it up because, sorry, I'm so bad at doing tiny explanations. So yeah, I think
wrap it up.
the final thing which I think it's important for Feminist Anti-War Resistance as a feminist organization is putting attention to the mental health of activists and people who are in Russia. And we organized a network of psychotherapists, volunteers who are providing free consultation, free psychological help to people and their families who were affected by repressions or by war in some way. So these are like a Telegram bot in Telegram application when you can write and you can get serious, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 free consultation in a crisis situation. And we had a lot of applications in this hotline. And, you know, from what we've seen, a lot of people have a very terrible mental state, because a lot of people, they don't have an opportunity to get out because they can't bring their families with them, they have work, they don't have money, they have responsibilities. A lot of people feel very bad because they, for example, lost their job because of their activism, or they are the relatives of the people who are in prison right now. And we think for sustainable activism, it's really important to pay attention to the mental health of the people who are staying in Russia, because sometimes people lose all the hope, and we need to work with this so they be able to, you know, to strive and to live, to continue at least a little resistance. And I think it's really hard for me to speak about the mental health of Russian citizens because it's hard to speak about it comparing to what Ukrainian people are going through. And we always can say that, okay, yeah, it's hard to live in Russia, but at least bombs are not exploding above our heads. But I think it's just different subjects. Yes, we have Ukrainian people and they need all of the help and they need all of the support and they have a lack of support and psychological help as well. But still, as an activist from Russia, I need to focus as well on this part of the work. And we cannot, you know, erase this matter because it's important matter. It's about the future of our civil society. And if we have all the activists in terrible mental state, the resistance will fall apart. So we have to take care about it as well. So yeah, that's not all that I wanted to mention, but you can always, you know, go to our social media and ask any questions. Feminist Anti-War Resistance, you can find it on Facebook, Instagram. On Facebook, we have English version of our social media. You can always contact with us, and we can give you context of other anti-war resistance movements in Russia. So just feel free to contact, and we are very interested in, you know, finding new allies all over the world, because we believe that this whole situation of the war in Ukraine, it's not the problem of Russian citizens only and Ukrainian people only. It's the problem of the whole world, like any war, like any oppression, like any state violence, like any dictatorship and authoritarianism. And I think here we as leftist people are very well aware that every regime, every oppression regime is a problem of every one of us, because at the end it will affect everybody in some way. Thank you.